on Bettor Sports Network.
We are into March, ladies and gentlemen. March 2nd, 2023 for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, exclusively here on the Bettor Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman, your slightly above average host. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course the Fantasy Football Players Championship, myffpc.com. Speaking of myffpc.com, remember that you can win $25,000 in the 2023 FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, just $125 to join that right now, and $5,000 is up for grabs as far as a grand prize. Prize pool is better part of $50,000 there for the 2023 FFPC Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament. That's just a $35 entry fee over at myffpc.com. Both tournaments are running through the NFL draft, or until the NFL draft, I should say. They conclude on April 27th, so you got the better part of 2 months to join that. They're going to follow Best Ball Slim rules. There's no kickers. There's no defenses. 20-round draft, 14-week regular season, and single-week elimination playoffs from weeks 15 through 17 before we crown a champion after week 17. Drafts available with 2-hour, 6-hour, 30-second, and 60-second clock over at myffpc.com. That's not all we have over at myffpc.com. We have plenty of dynasty orphans for you as well. That's right. You want to play fantasy football 365 days a year like our guest co-host tonight is an expert in? You can do that. myffpc.com. Plenty of reduced value dynasty orphans teams there. And we always say this too, like, when you talk about dynasty orphan teams, a lot of people just assume, oh, these are all train wreck teams. And I got to be honest with you, there are a couple of those, but you can get them for $1. So it's not a bad deal. But there's plenty others that are heavily discounted because owners get new jobs, they get new wives, they get divorced, they have kids, they have other stuff going on, they go to school, they graduate from school, they start a new job. It's a lot of different stuff going on. And you can take advantage of those teams, putting those dynasty teams that, quite frankly, can contend for championships right now. The league's entry fees start at $77. They go all the way up to $2,500. So, I mean, there's a price point in there for some of you who are watching tonight. No question. That's over at myffpc.com. And we are, if you're unfamiliar to Dynasty, or maybe you wish you were more well-versed in Dynasty, we are going to have plenty of Dynasty fantasy football talk tonight. My guest co-host, I'll introduce him right now. You follow him on Twitter at Chad Parsons NFL. You follow his work not only at footballguys.com, but all the Football Guys podcasts that he's on, the Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast he co-hosts with Jordan McNamara. And don't forget all the great stuff at Under the Helmet Dynasty, that's right, uthdynasty.com. You follow all his work there. It is the incomparable Chad Parsons. Welcome in tonight, Chad. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I mean, who's excited? You know, you take February off a little bit. March, you got free agency right behind that season. You mentioned Dynasty, but frankly, folks are drafting best ball, and we're following the NFL for the next 2 months with our eyes glued open because NFL draft is going to be here, and then we're rolling for 2023. It's amazing how it's basically a 10, 11 month a year business in terms of the news cycle of the NFL.
So, Chad, I dabble in Dynasty. I probably have about 6 or 7 Dynasty leagues, but I got to imagine a guy like you. I mean, when do you have, when is the downtime for somebody like you who not only is playing in a ton of Dynasty leagues, but producing a ton of Dynasty content year round?
Yeah, I thought about it today, and I think on an annual basis, I'm in the 600 episode range between Patriot Dynasty, between Football Guys, in terms of doing podcasts. And when I go 2 days in a row without press and record, you know, we talk about keeping your chops up, keeping your technique, striving to improve every day. When I go a couple of days, it feels like I'm out of practice. It's almost like, to run. You know, if he goes on a vacation for a week, it's like, I know what I'm doing with myself anymore. So yeah, more than a podcast a day on average. And all these teams, as you mentioned, Orphan is a great place. You said that in the opener with the Orphan sales that are, it's a great place because it's low risk. You almost get a free year in a lot of these cases, a discounted year. World Dynasty is forever. And those rosters, great opportunity to get there, make some mistakes. All have Dynasty just figure or to use is every year 2 or 3 years ago. What I was, I'm much smarter. I'm much better. I keep striving to improve. And if you do that year, look at your previous self and say, man, I really was a dope. And if I was your of striving to improve and reducing those weaknesses that are all of.
It's one of those things too, where it's like every single, especially with Dynasty, more so than redraft or anything else, best ball. I feel like every single time, Chad, I have a handle on it, something happens, or I witness a trend, or I witness a philosophy or a strategy, and I'm like, my God, I should have been taking that strategy for this particular team here. And there's just so much to learn. I always say it's something like Dynasty Fantasy Football. What's the old line from Texas Hold'em? It takes a minute to learn and a lifetime to master. And I think that Dynasty, it takes a minute to learn and a lifetime to master, but it's a lifetime of fun. Like, it's so much. And you mentioned like the Dynasty orphans that we have at myffpc.com, those 77s that are being orphaned right now. I mean, those are already paid for this year. So it's basically a free crack at 2023 for anybody who wants to take advantage and then see how it is in 2024. Coming up on tonight's show, by the way, I should mention this. So not only are we going to talk about players in the news right now, and what you should be doing with them in Dynasty, we're also going to talk about some Dynasty philosophy, how the best way to rebuild an orphan, the best way to avoid rebuilding in your leagues, and then of course, how do you handle a startup? What's the best way for long-term dominance of startup? Chad is going to give us his thoughts on that, and then we'll get into some rookie stuff before we get out of here. And Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds take over tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll kick things off in Jacksonville. Adam Schefter on Twitter earlier this afternoon said that the Jaguars are expected to tag Evan Engram with the franchise tag. It's worth about just over $11 million for tight ends this year. And the Jaguars have their top 3 players by snap count this past season, all free agents. They can corral in Evan Engram with the franchise. They're still talking contract. It's possible that they could come to a contract agreement before, and then lift the tag or what have you. But Chad, I guess the thing, and I've been saying this, and I think on this show, I said Evan Engram, I've been calling him the thief, because based on what he did last year in Jackson with Trevor Lawrence, I thought he was going to parlay that into a big contract with somebody. And I was going off his body of work for his entire career with the drops and everything. And maybe he's solved that to a certain extent. Maybe he has. But I was very skittish on anybody who had signed Evan Engram to a long-term agreement after this past career year. What does your colleague at Football Guys, Cecil Lammy, always say? The career year. That was the career year for Evan Engram. And I was very, very nervous about Evan Engram going forward here. It sounds like he's going to be in Jacksonville this year. Could be in Jacksonville long-term. It's an up-and-coming offense. I like what Doug Peterson's doing there. Evan Engram in Dynasty Leagues, is he a buy right now based on what you saw from him last year and given his current price tag?
Well, I think Evan Engram, he goes into a deeper conversation about tight end, which is, say, the haves and have-nots. Haves are those impact guys. The George Kittle, we saw a late run in the season when he finally got some passing game volume. So you need to be really careful about anointing from the non-haves group, because if you're the have-not, and frankly, Evan Engram had a good year, but he wasn't approaching the big boys. And so basically, it's interesting. The 1 year the tag, then it's basically another prove it year. It's saying we don't believe that you 2, 3 a year in your later. And I do it a little bit differently. I actually project top 4, the big 4 tight ends of the 23 class to go to Jacksonville. And that's independent of this, that if he gets a 1 year tag, that's a perfect transition developing, top into 24. So I think with Evan Engram, mid tight end 1, a career year, as you said, he struggled with consistency. He struggled with staying on the field, and he had the perfect storm of it in that alpha NFL profile walk. And so that was the perfect storm. And it really does feel like he challenges for the elite of the position. So I think you have to be, for example, format, you get the premium, and you get an Evan Engram who a lot of people are probably going to value consensusly as a top 8, top 10 guy around where he finished, or maybe even a little below where he finished last year. But I think it's important to not look that career year and say, well, what about health? What about if it just pops down a little bit? And I think Jacksonville is also a team we got to watch. addition. No, it's not a great free agent class, but even if it's a wide receiver in the draft that takes up 50, 67 targets, that's still notable for start adding to wide receiver, having more of an since the 4 to 5 years. So I'm a big fan of his, but about price, we talk about that on the Football Guy, that once a guy elevates, now you're kind of buying ceiling. You're not buying. Evan Ingram was way in the teens, I'm sure, 12 months ago when he was just landing in Jacksonville or not even there yet. Ambiguous, where am I going to play, land in 2022. So I think Evan Ingram is a little bit more of a hold than a sell. Explore, because again, if he already produces as a mid-tight end, that's closer to his ceiling, and he's not going to get all the way home into the top 2 or 3. You have to be very, very careful about what price you put and say, I can't move off of this position, because dynasty per year, redraft again for this year. I think if his cost is in the tight end 9 to 12, 13 range, I think that's fine on a 1-year play. But I think in dynasty, you bring in the contract, you bring in the overarching probability, and the fact 20s and in situations, it's probably not going to be as good as Jacksonville 2022.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. And I think that's a safe bet. And I will tell you this too. The Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, the FFPC, as you pointed out, Chad, he is tight end 9 right now. He's going right behind Pat Fryermuth, right ahead of Dalton Schultz, who there's a lot of questions about that guy right now too. But right now in that Never Too Early tournament, 703 is tight end 9. I definitely on board for that for this year. Dynasty, it's a little bit different, as you pointed out. Now, this guy, I feel like I missed the boat on in trading him. I probably only have like 2 shares, I think, in all my dynasty leagues of Alvin Kamara. But as of this afternoon, he pleaded not guilty during his arraignment on charges of conspiracy to commit battery and battery resulting in substantial bodily harm. The trial for Alvin Kamara, this was after the Pro Bowl, not this past year, but the year before, is expected to start the final day of July, which is during training camp for the Saints. Now, Alvin Kamara, we don't, and I'm waiting for, again, your colleague, Drew Davenport for Football Guys. He's always my go-to for stuff like this. And I've been following what he's been saying about Alvin Kamara, going to be following what he's saying about Jalen Carter, too, with everything going on with that for the Georgia defensive end, who is expected to be was expected to be a potential number 1 overall choice. But Drew Davenport, who's been on this show before, I'll be looking forward to see what he says on this. But Kamara, from a dynasty perspective, I feel like I probably should have traded him before 2022, Chad. And now at this point, I don't know what you could get for him. And as far as if anybody's looking to buy him at really cheap, I don't know if it's worth it anymore, given this legal issue and given the fact that he really dropped off last year from a production standpoint. Alvin Kamara in dynasty right now, to me, I mean, normally I'd say he's a sell, but I don't know what you can get for him at this point.
Yeah, that things go. His over, which is can play guy since he got into the NFL, and pretty continue to produce. And last year, my biggest quibble, optimal game, and I know Drew Brees on they were their prime. And so for Alvin Kamara, you take that away, and honestly, he looks like a human running back. Looks like a super weapon. When you use him split out, they were getting him 5+ targets every game, sometimes targets. And now last year, you're seeing him used again like a typical 1A running back. And and I have him at, an adjusted points per game. He was running shoulder shrug, didn't really make an impact. Drew, you mentioned huge legal expert. I love that channel. I call it football channel, but that, and we're always him with his advice on the legal side. And yeah, it seems like upwards of, it could be a half a year suspension. It could be 4 games. That spectrum, if you were now 8-year-old running back, you don't have a lot of room. Now, I will and then someone's do think Now, in Dynasty is about running back 20. That's quite a bit lower. He's the typical older running back. He's been years. So you way. Now, I running back 19, so I'm about neutral. But this news is, or as he's probably and this news that in July, as you said, it's probably going to drift into the 20s. But you start looking pretty over Alvin Kamara, Connor, Damian Pierce, over at Kamara. So you've got a lot of choices here. The proven profile is I think your point, a lot of times in Dynasty, because if a lot of times you say, what mark? And if for this rookie, you might get like a round 3 from a why looking at maybe one of the but positional value there. I'm not telling foods Kamara some Kamara with the annual draft pick. And not getting a first going to hold. If he gets this the year, he'll be back at some point. Be productive. 20 back he was last year when he wasn't even. I think it's really important to have patience because Dynasty is a redraft. If it's week 4, you're like, I got to get out of this thing. He's suspended for another month, and I might miss the playoffs. But in Dynasty, you're keeping that roster in January, so it's a whole different concept because if you sell these Kamara comes back in week 9, week 10, he's fresh. And he ends up fueling your playoff run, and he's still around for you in 2024 and beyond. So that's the real danger of being Dynasty with news, especially in the offseason, or if a talented player ended or injured.
Well, that brings us to a larger conversation, Chad, not just with Alvin Kamara, but when you hear stuff like this, because we are not, I love football guys, so I always bring up football guys, but your colleague Sigmund Bloom, who always says, August, September, we're drinking from the fire hose, right? Because there's so much info coming at you. March, April, for veterans, we don't always get that kind of information. Dynasty owners, do you think, in your experience in playing against your competition in these leagues, do you think they overvalue news blurbs like this in the offseason, and you can strike while the iron's hot on this and take advantage of people being overreactive to some situations like Kamara's and others?
Oh, for sure. And we always say that this is bikini season. This is where your Dynasty roster, the younger the guy you have, the more rookie picks you have, the better. Like if you're selling an orphan, for example, you get 3 or 4 first-round picks on that roster, and you could have a skeleton of a starting lineup, no core players, but that's going to go for, retail price, maybe even a premium. But you get a roster that has, you get Kirk Cousins, blue, the unexpected on that team, Amari Cooper, and that team is going to be like, I don't want that. They'd rather take a shot on 4 rookies that probably aren't going to be productive this year, and you're hoping of them pan out. And then you could have just already been competing and contending. So yeah, this is the year where the best time to buy veterans and profiles that you trust is basically March draft, and then get August. You start setting lineups, and those players, the Cooper, becoming valuable again. It's a 3. And all of you like, well, I lost to the Cooper Cup team. I lost to, all these teams that had the 28-year-old wide receiver and the 26-year-old running back, and that wasn't cool in March. Yeah, and you really have to exploit that. And basically, I call it ambulance chasing. And if it's any sort of touch to a player's profile, I an edge and be like, you want to do Alvin Kamara? Let's do this, and that's the example was in the news again. That let's think back 12 months ago. We're not picking up the 5th-year option. Does that really matter at running back? Like, I actually thought that was a decent move by the Raiders to say, we don't want to commit to that. We don't want to commit to a mid-20s running back. And he put up a career year, probably a little motivated. But we're also talking about not a huge difference in salary between that fifth-year option price or whatever. And John, one where that news comes out and, we haven't seen it. But he was a bigger back, can move, can catch, back for his offense. And guess what? They drafted Zamir White. That was the perfect storm. All of a sudden, he's going in running back 20s for Dynasty. What does he do? Elite running back 1. So Josh Jacobs, to me, is always going to be a real cornerstone player as an example of saying that's an example in the offseason when a player does not have any buzz about them. And, DeAndre might be a good example this offseason of just so much negativity, and just the ceiling is possible and is there. It doesn't mean careful about throwing that, assuming it's. And Zamir White wasn't going to take Josh Jacobs' job. And again, you get him in the running back 20s, you basically have he's running back for the Raiders in 2022, and that's exactly what happened, with profit on the upside from there.
So in regards to Jacobs, because I have him on a really good dynasty team I have, and so my inclination as well, I think I took second in the league. I probably should have won, but the week 17, the Bills and Bengals, I ended up losing that dynasty. We're not going to get into it, but I feel like I should have been a champion in that league. The league I have Josh Jacobs in, I feel like I'm going to hang on to him, because regardless if he stays in Las Vegas, if he moves on, somebody's going to pay him to be their lead guy. I feel like that Jacobs has much more to give, even though he's a free agent. And in Dynasty, a lot of times we devalue players with uncertain futures, which is what Jacobs has right now. But you look at him from a Dynasty perspective, I don't know, man. If I'm looking to move him, I'm not taking less than 100 cents on the dollar, because I think he could have another big 2023 season like he did in 2022. Maybe not lead the league in rushing, but certainly a top 12, a top 10 running back finish. Your thoughts on Josh Jacobs for Dynasty going forward this year? Would you be looking to acquire him in your leagues?
I think he's still undervalued. Running back 8 to 10 feels, after a big year, he's in his mid-20s, certainly not old position coming into his age 25 season. A lot of people forget he came in at 21. Tread taking off his tires at Alabama either. But let's look at the landscape. It's all about comparison. I mean, when you get past about 6, 7, 8 names, it gets dicey in a hurry. Because if you're going to say 25 is old, you've got to write off Christian McCaffrey at 27. You've got to write off Saquon at 26. Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon's got his whole bag of stuff going on. Is 87. So if you're right off age, throw those guys out. Okay. Do you trust Bijan Robinson, incoming rookie? Do you trust that? Not even knowing where he's going to land. Let's say if you're drafting or trading or, going to trade for 101 or whatever. Travis Etienne's already 24. He's a sneaky 24 because he missed his first year and he was a 4-year player in college. Breece Hall, nice month and a half, but he's coming off of a serious injury. Do you trust that? Najee Harris, a lot of people want to bet. He's 25 as well. Jonathan Taylor coming off of injury. We keep going with this. So if you say no to Josh, start running backs, right? So, I mean, and then you go in a bunch of 28-year-olds like Derrick Henry who might, the whole point is a lot quicker. So I would just say, enjoy it. Be lucky. Be fortunate that you have a projected workhorse back and catch a few more balls. That would be nice. But is Amir Abdullah going to be there this year? He had to catch year. It just hasn't happened all the time. And you have a player projected to get every week independent of game script. That is a tough thing to cobble 2 or 3 of those together for your fantasy and dynasty lineup. So that's the big thing, is it's all about supply and demand. We talked about elite tight ends. If you got one of those guys, you're probably not trading Travis Kelce. It doesn't matter what you're thinking about. He might fall off. Is this peak value? Handful of running backs. So yeah, I think value, and you're like, I'm thinking of Najee Harris plus for Breece Hall straight across. You're getting 3 years younger. Those are okay. Market right now, you would be able to trade Breece Hall for Josh Jacobs. So that to me, that's backwards. So yeah, really careful. I think you have to be really bailing off of a team. And you mentioned, talking about rebuilding or when is the time to rebuild. And I think just far And I think for many people sit there and they go, well, last year I lost in the first playoffs, my whole team down. You're probably a lot and closer to a bye. I mean, weak team. There's not as much of a divide in dynasty in most. A horrible team and a great team, but the points are pretty close. I think you got to be careful about just, I'm going to trade you the wide receiver one of this class. It might. And then what do you have? Josh Jacobs, he could have put up 2 big years for you. So you got to be super careful about giving up the proven.
With him being a free agent right now, do you think he ends up in Vegas? Or I guess the question I should be asking you, Chad, is if he doesn't end up in Vegas, how concerned are you about a role change for him where he doesn't put up, even top 15 numbers at running back this year? How does the uncertainty of where he's playing this year change your evaluation on Jacobs, if at all?
I'm not super. We're looking at a round one guy that's mid-career. He's proven himself every single year. He's been a top 24 back in fantasy, and he just put up a career. Again, I like to project the profiles. Round one guy, been productive, and now he's peaked as a high running back one. And so why would we project that differently going through his production 21 through 27? He's got 25, 26, and 27. 4 years. You're basically his prime window here. A lot of people fear, with back, if you have a clear workhorse role, you get paid. I mean, you look at the profiles out there. Is someone going to pay Alexander Madison instead? And I love Madison, but I mean, is someone going to pay Leonard Fournette if he's released or something? Oh, Josh Jacobs is going to be one of those paid more than Montgomery. So there, you have to look at supply and say he's going to have a job. They're going to pay him. He's going to have multi-year allegiance. If it's not with the Raiders, it's going to be somewhere else. And how about this? What about the possibility? Because I just said the Raiders haven't really optimized him in the passing game. Next team does. And we don't. To say the Raiders, great situation. Let's look at the average of the other better quarterback than what the Raiders without Carr look like right now. So that's the thing. It's unknown. I think generally, if you have a dominant wide receiver in terms of his market share or a tight end that was in the perfect situation and they're leaving, I think that's a more difficult projection than Josh Jacobs if he were to leave the Raiders.
All right, so let's get in. We went from Josh McDaniels' current team. I want to go to his former team here in New England. Now, Mike Reese, who covers the New England Patriots for ESPN.com, he said that, use his words here, Jacoby Myers might project to get a contract near what Christian Kirk got with the Jaguars this coming offseason. Kirk signed with the Jaguars 4 years, $72 million, and $37 million. A little bit more than half of that was guaranteed. Myers has had one less catch over his first 4 years than Christian Kirk did. Reese thinks he's going to be able to sign a deal that's going to be worth $15 to $20 million. He also points out that this might be a sticking point for New England. Now, Chad, I play all my leagues are full PPR. I don't play in any half PPR. So for the selfish purposes of this question, I'm going to ask it to you in a full PPR standpoint. Free agent wide receiver class is not great. Incoming rookie receiver class is not great. Jacoby Myers, if you're doing deals for him right now, if you're looking to move him, if you're looking to acquire him, how do you handle a guy like this? Is he a guy that you would be willing to pay over 100 cents on the dollar? Or is he a guy that you think his fantasy production has been inflated because he has been such a PPR maven over the past, really his entire career in New England? Jacoby Myers, your thoughts on him in trading for or trading away him in dynasty leagues right now?
I thought he was going to be on his way to a much better. And I think, again, for not a bad situation, he put up about wide receiver 30. And he topped out over the years. But here's the alpha wide receiver. And that's always dangerous. Yes, he's going to be one of the top 1, 2, 3 wide receivers that's available for NFL free. But 7.6 yards per route run is about the NFL average, or, there. I love his hands, but he doesn't do much, frankly. So he's not a guy that really elevates. He can get targets. It's going to carry a passing game. So I think in Dynasty, about anointing a player like that and saying, this player is critical. Because if you're a third B, or, if you're in rosters, you can replicate FFPC, you can couch cushions, you can find streaming guys that are streaming like Isaiah Hodgins and 5 each wire. So that if you lose Jacoby Myers in a ditch there looking for your wide receiver, you're really not. So for Jacoby Myers, I like to say, use him as a stepping stone player. You're not going to get a lot. You might get a second round pick if you're trading him straight up in a 1-for-1 basis. I don't generally like to play receiver or running back profile. Draft rookies. You can get waiver wire and get them as add-on to deals. I don't really like to go out. So for Jacoby Myers, I think you need to add to him to get where you want to go. You might get a top 10, top 12 tight end. But again, if you're not getting a guy that you think has top 5 upside, you got to be really careful with that. So for me, Jacoby Myers is one that where, a great trade I just saw was Jacoby Myers and a first round pick this year for AJ Brown and a second. So see, you're adding on to that first. You're essentially saying the deal is hey, let me the wheels. Let me show you that I'm serious. It'll help out more. I'm not really helping your receiver core that much. Myers, and in 12 months, what do I have? You need to top him. Appeal as a wide, so that you. But I think 2 for wide position or at wide receiver.
And we're getting into the minutia now. There's no reason that Chad Parsons had to volunteer that trade information. This is how you get an edge in your dynasty leagues as far as trades go. We're going to get into so many more trades and stuff with Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty, uthdynasty.com. I believe I have that right, Chad? uthdynasty.com. Okay, uthdynasty.com, patreon.com/UTH is where to get the Patreon, and then all his work that he does over at Football Guys, footballguys.com, podcasts, everything, not only podcasts, but the written word as well over at footballguys.com. You follow him on Twitter at Chad Parsons NFL. We're going to step out real quick, not long. When we come back, we're going to talk about Chad's thoughts on Deontay Johnson, whether it's wheels up for Cade Otton in Tampa. We're going to talk about the Jets quarterback situation, as well as the weird back and forth between Ravens GM Eric DeCosta and former Ravens first-round pick Rashad Bateman. We're going to talk about whether Deshaun Watson is going to cause a rebound for everybody in Cleveland in year 2. And we're also going to get into the Buffalo number 2 wide receiver situation. Is it Gabe Davis? Is it Khalil Shakir? Is it nobody on the roster right now? That and more. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Chad Parsons. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Bettor Sports Network. Don't go anywhere.
The Playbook with Fensty and Ronis, presented by FantasyAlarm.com. Weekdays at 5 Eastern.
People are always very critical when it comes to fantasy baseball. I would say this, and I'm a big fantasy basketball guy. I love fantasy football. There's no fantasy sport that's even close to being as hard as baseball. The season, having to figure out, especially if you're playing weekly, which I don't like to play. Weekly with the 2 starts, having to look at the schedule and everything. I mean, you play in basketball as well. There's no fantasy sport that's harder or more involved than baseball. It takes forever. You take a whole night to do your fab on Sundays.
Yeah, baseball is the most challenging, and I think that's why the popularity has gone down. People don't want to work. They don't want to put in the time. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it. You have to know the player pool. That's why I love doing these 15-team, 50-round drafts. I mean, 750, 800 players. You lower all the minor leaguers. I took Spencer Strider last year in my first draft Champions League in round 40, and that turned out to be a phenomenal pick. So They put you on to knowing everything about every team. And yeah, it's a lot of work. So I definitely think that it's a challenge, and I just feel like people don't want to put in time and work anymore. And I'm not saying fantasy football is easy. It's not. But you cannot tell me that fantasy football is more difficult than fantasy baseball. I play both sports. I don't have an allegiance to either one. I love both. I play both. But, fantasy baseball is a grind, man. You got to put in months of preparation. They help me get to go. I was not on them until the spring, seeing the velocity and the changes. So there's a lot of things you can discover in the spring. And this is the first real full spring training that we've had in years. Now, there is the WBC that is going to cut into it a little bit, and some guys will not be at camp. But the spring can help you discover. And again, you're talking about, even if you're in a 12-team league, I mean, you're probably going to have 23 to 30 roster spots. And then the 15-team leagues and the minor leagues, I mean, you got to know a lot. I mean, it takes a lot of skill to win a fantasy baseball title. We've seen it, right? You can have like an average player win a fantasy football league. Like, we've all been in leagues where like, yeah, this guy's not that good. He's probably going to win a championship at some point. Things break right. He has a great draft, picks up a player off the waiver wire. That's not happening in fantasy baseball, man. You do not see bad players win fantasy baseball championships. You just don't. It's a 6-month season. You can't afford to take a week or two off from Fab. You can't do it. Last year, say you took off the week where Taylor Ward was the big pickup. You lost a player that was a contributor most of the season. I know we had a couple of down periods, and Taylor Ward was a player I added in multiple leagues, but you can't take that time off. You can't afford to miss out. And, every little detail is important. So I know fantasy baseball is not as popular as it used to be, but I personally feel it's because people don't want to work hard. They just don't. Everyone wants the easy way out now. They want easy access. That's why people don't read anymore. They want a quick video. Fantasy baseball is a lot of work, trust me. But you know what? When you win a championship, it's really gratifying.
Make bets and follow your fantasy team while you buy, sell, and trade collectibles in real time. Only on Bettor Sports Network.
Dynasty.com, at UTH Dynasty on Twitter, at Chad Parsons NFL on Twitter. Patreon.com/UTH is where to go for that as well. Hey, just a real quick mention. I know we're a fantasy football show here, but I do want to bring up that the Bettor Sports Network is actually getting you ready for the upcoming baseball season with the Bettor Baseball Preview. From fantasy baseball to MLB betting and the newest baseball cards for 2023, you can access our exclusive content for free right now at bettorsports.com, featuring some of the best baseball minds in the industry: Adam Ronis, Ray Flowers, Kyle Elfrink, and Cody Decker. Get player profiles, prop bets, and futures, sleepers and busts, fantasy draft strategy, collectibles, and more at no cost. Please register with your name and email at bettorsports.com right now and get instant access plus notifications when new features are released. Go to bettorsports.com and sign up for the Bettor Baseball Preview. All right, so let's get into this, Chad. I feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers situation, the passing game there, is an interesting one. Was an interesting one last year, continues to be an interesting one this year. You have a guy like George Pickens, who is stepping up. Rookie last year that I know a lot of people were high on. Kenny Pickett looks to be the new quarterback in charge there. Pat Freiermuth is a guy that's going to grow with Pickett there. And then you have Deontay Johnson. Your thoughts on Deontay Johnson, who for PPR for many years was very, very good. Your thoughts on what he is in 2023 and how to handle him in Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues right now, man.
Yeah, there's two things going on here, which is, and I just want to say for the 12 months ago and heading into rookie drafts in 2022, I was picking out there. Prospect going to an elite profile. Now, I actually think George Pickens now is a sell. So we're combining Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, same depth chart. But here's what we do know. Unless you have an elite quarterback, only one of these wide receivers is going to survive and thrive. The other guy is going to be fighting for scraps. Both of them struggled a little bit, but the only reason Deontay Johnson was, wide receiver 35-40 last year was because no touchdown. touchdowns are a huge driver. So even if he's not a dominant touchdown scorer in his career, huge regression candidate for 2023 in Deontay Johnson. 18 seasons under his belt. He's finished as a top 10. Deontay Johnson is George Pickens, contested average depth of target guy that are not super predictive year over year. He has to win. Seed a little bit this year. Much after the pick is rising up, and he's going to take Deontay Johnson's job. Buying that at all, and Deontay Johnson, the assets you're looking at him a lot of times in the wide receiver 30s in dynasty rankings of wide receiver. I have him easily in the top 25 at 20 years old. He's a double hit player, top 24 2 years. He also has a peak at wide receiver 7. These are hard achievements at wide receiver. And I do a thing called a future cast. There, unique aspects of the UTH Dynasty rankings at wide receiver. He has a 44% chance to produce a top 12 season. That's a high number, and only about 10, 12 guys on the landscape have a higher than 44% chance. So you really have to take that into stock. He has ceiling. If he just added a few touchdowns, we would see a different number, and I think there'd be a different perspective on Johnson coming into the offseason. So we also don't have a dominant quarterback. Kenny Pickett is developing, but let's be fair. He could play his way out of a job in Pittsburgh this year as say, I'm going to be the starter here for the rest of my rookie contract. So he is not an elite option right now. Only one of these guys is going to survive. Let me ask you, that had light aerial catches, didn't do a whole lot otherwise. Or is it the guy who's been in the league for a while, he's finished in the top 18 twice? To me, that's an easy answer. Wide receiver.
Well, Chad, let me just tell you this. I know it's an easy answer for you, and maybe to make it easier for me, regardless of how you personally feel about that, it's not, yes, prognostication comes into it, but it's capitalizing on the market value, right? And the perceived market value right now, George Pickens is significantly higher than Deontay Johnson, right? So wouldn't you want to cash in a few chips to get Deontay Johnson on your roster, and conversely, maybe pay a lot to cash in a lot to get rid of George Pickens and acquire not only draft capital, but maybe another player like Deontay Johnson. I think that's the thing that comes to it. And this is the way I've always played Dynasty, and correct me if you think I should be doing it differently. But to me, like, yes, I have my own personal sleepers and busts and fades and what have you. But to me, Dynasty is all about the market value. And if I can get an edge, especially at the high stakes realm, if I can get an edge here or there, I'm going to take that and try to nickel and dime it, sort of like how Daryl Morey, not to bring basketball into this, but sort of how Daryl Morey built this, what he did in Houston before, he left, and now he's in Philadelphia right now in the NBA, where he just tried to incrementally get a little bit better with every single trade. And I feel like sometimes you have to, when you're competing against really talented players, you have to win at the margins. And to me, this is not a margins deal. Like, Deontay Johnson should be a buy right now, especially based on everything you're telling me. And George Pickens is a guy that you should be selling, right?
Yeah, and George Pickens, in my own personal, and I have full transparency at Football Guys and UTH. I share my trades, so when they go wrong, you can go back and post stamp it. For 2 years ago, trading Alvin Kamara, trades a few years ago in the offseason where get players. No player have more than in the late rookie drafts last May heavily. I was all in on George Pickens at the price point. Now he's worth more. I've traded him for 105, which guarantees me, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, or a first round pedigreed wide receiver at a minimum. But I can also do whatever I want with 105. For Robinson, I also plus one for Tyreek Hill. You ask me who's more productive the next 2 years, George Pickens and some late first rookie, or Tyreek Hill. I think it's a fair and saying you're all in on somebody months later and say you're all out.
Yeah.
We have done now, and what is the profile now? That could be different in week 6. And again, I quarterback, and still there, not going anywhere. He's locked in. Key factor. Deontay, trades I want to bring up that I've seen over the past week or so. Opportunities. First one is Deontay Johnson for Sky. You could be high on Greg Dulcich. He flashed last year, but Sky Moore did almost nothing as a rookie. And I know there's going to be at some point. We've got Mormon, a free agent, Juju Smith-Schuster, a free. Somebody out there is all set. Break out this year, and that's how 2 top 18 good. They're taking a massive leap that he's going to have a better season than Deontay Johnson forward. Another on the other side that I think you have to be skeptical of the draft to come. Deontay Johnson, Tyler Algier, 3, and Tyler, who could be back in Atlanta, probably needs Adam. Cordell Patterson is probably going to be there, but this is a high quality season. Is he the next Arian Foster? Is he the next Deonta Freeman? I think you have to be careful with that question. Tyler Algier is a try-hard guy. He's based. Johnson, he's going to be target. Again, you build up back. For wide. So this is trade spec plays for the low point.
And the better boss chiming in the chat right now. Deontay Johnson, goodbye low candidate in dynasty leagues. He has to score some touchdowns next season. You would think, I remember Miles Sanders, coming into the 2022 season, he told people not to draft him in fantasy football. And he was, I don't want to say he was calling out the Philadelphia offense, but certainly didn't give a glowing endorsement of it. And then he crushed it this past year, got a ton of touchdowns and paid off for owners who either traded for him or drafted him. Now this year could be a completely different thing. This is what's so great about Dynasty is you fall in love with market values. You don't necessarily fall in love with players. And I think that's something I think Chad has been echoing all night tonight on the show. Now, because this is an FFPC podcast, I am contractually obligated to talk at least about some tight ends. And the tight end that we're going to talk about right now is Cameron Brate in Tampa. The Buccaneers, according to Adam Schefter from ESPN.com, have released Cameron Brate. It's a $5 million cap hit. Now, he had an injury-shortened 2022 season. He had some issues with his neck. He was dealing with some concussion symptoms as well. And then in his stead, Cade Otton, who was a rookie last year, picked on day 3, by the way, started, and what is probably going to be the guy unless they sign somebody or bring somebody in through the draft. Brate is going to save Tampa $2 million in cap space. If they designate him as a post-June first cut, he's going to get them $4 million in cap space. But your thoughts, Chad, and I know you guys, you and Jordan McNamara, on the Football Guys Dynasty show, you talk about this a lot with the shallow leagues in the FFPC Dynasty level. But your thoughts on Cade Otton there, because I think he's a borderline top 12 guy right now, and we know he's up and coming. Doesn't exactly have the draft pedigree, but he showed out last year in limited time based on what our expectations were for him at the start of the season. Now that Brate is no longer in Tampa, is it wheels up for Cade Otton in Dynasty?
Yeah, it might be. I actually did my latest Dynasty mock draft for the NFL draft. It was, I actually think with this move is to add. Now, is that going to be one of the big top guys? Doubt it. So it's probably going to be in that round 3, 4, 5 range. But that still is, you mentioned, Cade Otton was 3 pick himself. So that could be tangible competition for Otton. Not right away, but during 2023 and on into 2020. Long. My concern with Cade Otton is he was an aggregator last year. He's not a aggregator with the going to get, and he's losing Tom Brady. So that's a big negative. In my projection model, you can get all this. I think school built looking for fantasy production on your first 3 years, production scores, all these types of. Cade Otton, 8% athleticism score, This is a position of freaks. You've got to be over 50%. Some of these guys are over 80, 90% at the top of the position. Why do people like Kyle Pitts? Why do people like, all these top elite tight ends? It's because they're a bunch of athletes. They're borderline and how athletic they are. That is not Kate. He is going to elevating beyond the slate of the huge concern with freak. But if K-Dot truckload of targets, he's got to have the perfect storm of probably peak out at 5. Realistically, he's probably going to be somewhere in that tight end. You mentioned a top 12 guy, with production line, top 12, number 12 isn't different from 7. It's 25.
Right.
The FFPC. Be a little careful about projecting him because no Tom Brady. Some Godwin could be on the. Have a new quarterback. If it's Kyle, hold on to your hats because that's probably going to be a massive step down for that whole offense. And someone like K. Dotton would absolutely, be stuck probably in. So I think a K. Dotton has to survive the draft and then has to survive whatever's coming with quarterback. So I think Otten falls into the interesting bucket. But you mentioned that ideal building is if you have 2 tight ends on your roster, they're both line up and or they're both stud. One work out, chuck them to the waiver wire, get another guy, save the roster spot because they're at such a premium. Keep K. Dotton the line for cut is in a few weeks here, so you're going to keep them for that. But again, I think the macro team building philosophy is you want to be lean and mean. If it's start one quarterback, start tight end, and that is absolutely the format in most dynasty leagues.
I want to move on to we'll stick in the we'll switch to the AFC here. Eric DeCosta, I read the comments that he made at the combine. I understand why Rashad Bateman took them as a slight, but I don't think that they were necessarily as egregious as maybe he thinks they are. They're feuding back and forth. I don't necessarily want to talk about the feud as much as I look at what the Baltimore Ravens have done this offseason. No more Greg Roman, and they bring on Todd Monken, who loves to pass the football. Now, granted, he had the athletes to do it at Georgia. He had the quarterback. He had the perimeter players. George Pickens, we've been talking about him. He had the ability to do it. Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews, are you willing to pay a little bit more than full value right now because you think that these guys could explode in 2023? Or does the Lamar Jackson, the nebulousness of what's going on with him and how the Ravens are going to treat him, is that keeping you from saying, oh my God, I know Bateman and Andrews could have a big 2023, but I'm not so sure without Lamar Jackson. Your thoughts on Bateman in dynasty leagues right now, man?
I am very skeptical of Rashad Bateman. And he has the type of profile, and I say this at wide receiver when a guy hasn't done it, hasn't been top 12, hasn't been top 24, and yet people start to put him up near there. He's generally going in the low 30s, 30 to 35 by the market. I think that's still too. Through 2 years, he's been wide receiver 60 and wide receiver 65 in adjusted points per game. This is a bust track. I know we're used to that, 10, 20 years ago, the third breakout for wide receivers. And yeah, that still exists. But you know what? We're in the microwave society. We need to see more signs in year 1 and year 2 than Rashad Bateman has shown. And let's keep in mind, I mentioned about you got to have a big time quarterback if you want a couple of really high level weapons. Or you need to be, clear wide receiver 1. Rashad Bateman on paper in light pencil in March, receiver 1. However, Mark Andrews is actually the wide receiver 1 in practice, just like in Kansas City. So tight end. And then done other than by his name, what has he done far? Well, he has a 12% drop rate in the NFL. When you get above about 9 or 10, he's in a for a role very quickly. And so he's not getting a lot of deep targets, and yet he's still dropping a lot. Has been one of my stuff. A drop rate higher than your average of target, big trouble. And it's 10.7 for targets over, and he's one of the few valued this highly to do player. He hasn't broken and eluded enough tackles on a per catch basis. There's a lot of concern here. And I would say this, Baltimore has drafted a lot of capital at wide receiver, the Devin Duvernays of the world, Tylan Wallace,
James Crochet,
back in Marquise Brown. Exactly. I mean, the point is they've thrown a ton of picks, have worked, and they traded Marquise Brown away. I think they're going to dip back into it. I think it's going to be a top 100 pick. It may be much higher. There's projections it's going to be in round 1. I think someone like, a Jackson Jigba, one of these that they need utilizing for play. We might not get the result of a top 5 receiver, but we just can't whiff. We need a guy that's going to come in and get 100 plus targets and be our guy, because we can't count. I think that's coming. And so I think right now in the wide receiver 30s, you have a possibility. I've already outlined trade type ideas where you can go Bateman, add something to it, and get someone elite. And I think you have that possibility, so you don't have to mess around with what's going to happen with Lamar Jackson, what's going to happen with the new offensive system, what's going to happen with this depth chart. And Rashad, personally, just looking at his profile, has not done enough to say he started off competition. He's coming off of injury, and he's coming off of 2 years of not being an efficient and player pointed the right direction. And I think that's troubling when you say he needs now better play, and he needs to do it on a consistent basis, and he needs more volume. That's a lot of ifs going into year 3 that I think Baltimore is just not going to have time for that. And I think they're going to look to supplement the position in a major way.
And this is Chad, you framed it perfectly. As Penny Lane from Almost Famous would say, it's all happening, right, with Bateman. Because if you find the right person in your league who's like, look, Bateman hasn't been healthy enough to be a bust, right? And I'm not saying he is a bust, but he has not been healthy enough for people to some people to totally give up on him. So now you have this baked cake, this fresh baked cake with Rashad Bateman, and you have the Todd Monken icing coming in right now. Now you can sell this and get, as you said, Rashad Bateman plus could get you an elite player. And I think that's the take home here with Bateman, is that you might have something with him, but you could transfer that via trade to get something really good if you find a semi-believer in Bateman here, as long as you're willing to throw in something else with that. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to I want to talk about the Browns here, because I think this is the widest scope of things that we can get into here for dynasty purposes. Deshaun Watson basically didn't play in 2 years. And then he came back last year, week 13 or whatever it was, and was kind of meh, average, whatever, below average. He's got the tools. David Njoku's going to be there. Amari Cooper is going to be there. Donovan Peoples-Jones. I don't believe you're a believer in David Bell. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But you look at the Cleveland offense this year. What are your thoughts on if you're looking to sell or acquire pieces of this Browns offense that's going to be led by Deshaun Watson? How do you feel about, and we'll stay away from the Nick Chubb aspect of it. I want to focus specifically on the pass catchers here. Njoku, Cooper, Deshaun Watson in year 2, or the first full year of Watson in Cleveland.
Yeah, we started. We see more, like in advance. I think it was actually not last offseason, but this offseason, John Watson and one of our diabolically deep 2 quarterback leagues together. And the idea was, we are trading for an elite player. Let's rewind all the way to Deshaun Watson playing vibrantly in Houston. And that was when he was considered right there with Patrick Mahomes. These are the up and coming young phenoms of the position at the NFL. And he's one of the things I is interception rate ratio there. And the theory is about 1.0 is the NFL. And Deshaun Watson last year, just hand ring, just more play, and people thought he was going to come back after absence and turmoil legally going on in his life, that he was going to come back mid-season, midstream, that same elite player, switching teams, switching everything from Houston and what he previously had when he was playing. And he was average. He was 1.0 for the time he played that. 1.34, which is a near elite. The only guys really that have played a bunch in the NFL that are higher, guys like Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Wilson, and these are career numbers. So he is one that's right there with Josh Allen for his career. So this is something that I expect to bounce back in a major way. I think betting on the Browns passing game, where you need to be for an elite quarterback is a more can still win from the pocket, win from his arm, and have big time passing days. Epitome of that. He's not going to run for 1,000 yards, yard upside every given game. And he's one that, again, this is a pretty big sample size. The fact that he's so clearly above average elbows with guys like Justin Herbert, Josh Allen for career numbers in this very sticky metrics. For Deshaun Watson, this is betting on that combination with Amari Cooper, I think, receiver personally, and David Njoku as well. That trio in the passing game is going to be one that we saw a few signs, but we're going to see a full off season finally, and finally see the iteration that we. If Watson earlier had a better lead up to him actually playing, now he's going to get that full lead up like every other NFL team.
I don't want to make it seem like I perform empty teases on the show, but I may perform empty teases on the show. We didn't get to the Jets quarterback situation. We didn't get to Gabe Davis and the Buffalo Bills receiver. Number 2 wide receiver. I want to get to that in the next segment as well. We have to step out, but not only are we going to talk about that, we're going to get Chad's dynasty philosophy on how to properly manage startups, how to properly manage orphans. How do you keep from rebuilding? We're going to talk about the NFL Combine, which the actual athletic part of the Combine is underway tonight with the defensive guys. We're going to talk about reading Combine results properly, and we're going to talk about the biggest mistakes dynasty players are making this time of year and how you can avoid them. That's all coming up in hour 2 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty and footballguys.com at Chad Parsons NFL on Twitter. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Hour 2 is just underway momentarily. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Monday Night Rants with Edward Rouse on Bettor Sports Network.
Do you believe in the Madden curse? Do you think that's a real thing?
I did. Now, I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore, but it was a real thing for a solid 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it was Sean Alexander, LaDainian Tomlinson, Peyton Hillis.
LT was never on the cover. I know that.
Was he not? I thought he was one. Okay, well, you do know all the covers of everything.
Yeah, okay, so if you want, I could do this real quick. So Garrison Hurst is the first official Madden cover athlete, 1999. 2000, I believe they still put John Madden on the cover. And then 2001 is where it all started. So 2001, you have Eddie George. 2002, Dante Culpepper. 2003, Marshall Falk. 04, Michael Vick. 05, Ray Lewis, first defensive player on the cover.
Okay.
06, Donovan McNabb. 07, Sean Alexander.
Okay.
08, Vince Young. 09, Brett Favre.
Okay.
10 is a trick one because it's
no way you know.
And Larry Fitzgerald. 11, Drew Brees. 12, Peyton Hillis. 13, Calvin Johnson, I believe so.
You're right.
14.
No way you know all this.
14, also a trick question.
Uh-huh.
I believe that's the Madden 25 cover, and it's Barry Sanders. Unless you got it for the new consoles, in which case Adrian Peterson
Oh my God.
was on the cover.
You're not cheating. You're not looking at.
Swear on my life. Swear on my life.
Okay, keep on going.
15, you have Richard Sherman.
Okay.
16, hold on. 16 is Odell Beckham.
Okay.
16. 17, now this is the one I get mixed up because 17 and 18 are back-to-back Patriots.
They are.
17, I think, is Gronk, and 18 is Brady.
You are correct.
19, Antonio Brown.
Correct.
20, Patrick Mahomes.
Oh my goodness.
21, Lamar Jackson. 22, Brady Mahomes. 23, John Madden. Yeah, dude, I'm a cover nerd when it comes to this stuff.
We now know, but that was really impressive. I don't know how.
Thank you.
That's literally 29 of them or something like that. Wow, that is. You did not miss a single one, and you even got the special editions where they had 2 people on the covers.
Monday Night Rants on Bettor Sports Network.
Hour number 2 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Bettor Sports Network, bettorsports.com. And of course, I am talking with Chad Parsons, UTHDynasty.com, Under the Helmet Dynasty, footballguys.com, the Football Guys Dynasty podcast that he co-hosts with one Jordan McNamara. Chad, it has been a pleasure at Chad Parsons NFL.com, at Chad Parsons on Twitter. I'm getting them all mixed up here, to have you on the program tonight. Before we get into your dynasty strategy, a couple of things I want to bring up. Number one, from March Madness to the World Series, Bettor Sports Network presents the 2023 Sports Futures Draft, featuring picks and odds for the most exciting sports events of the year. Join Corey Parson, Nando DeFino, and the Bettor team of producers to find out where the best values are in sports futures, plus betting advice and strategy. Don't miss the Sports Futures Draft, now playing at bettorsports.com and on demand on the Bettor Sports Network app. Now, which is free in the App Store and Google Play. Jets quarterback situation. Chad, I don't know if you know this about me, but I work out of Northeast Wisconsin, so I'm a couple of Aaron Rodgers Hail Marys southwest of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I try to make it a point not to talk about Aaron Rodgers on my shows, but I feel like when we talk about the Jets quarterback situation, his name will inevitably find a way into the conversation. One of the things I've talked about with some high stakes owners over the past couple of weeks is that guys like Garrett, especially Garrett Wilson, they're being drafted as if Rodgers is already on the team. And quite frankly, if Rodgers is not on the team, you're looking at Zach Wilson, potentially Mike White, maybe Derek Carr, and a bunch of question marks right now. Your thoughts on the Jets passing game right now? Conklin, Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, right now as it stands, with the Jets roster having Zach Wilson and not a whole lot else, maybe having Mike White, maybe having Rodgers, Carr. Your thoughts on how to handle Jets pass catchers in dynasty leagues right now?
Yeah, wide range. I mean, you mentioned Mike White, Zach Wilson. I mean, that say it's about a low percentage of range we've seen so far from him. I think it's Garrett Wilson, and then everybody else is kind of sitting over there. He was impressive, and that was with a quarterback situation for a lot. Elijah Moore, I think there's some sort of around. So Moore is the one that's overcooked. The thing I think that's important situation. And then if it was Mike White plan at this point, that would be considered a worst case. And I always say you look at and how people are valuing players. I give the value pretty fairly. You could say that be a bump up in efficiency. There could be a bump up in total offensive acumen. So I think that's the good sign. The bad side, here, Garrett Wilson, with what he did, drafted player, I believe that I have in the whole passing game would be Elijah Moore, because we talked about going after ancillary guys, going after guys that had actions that people are holding out super patience for that they really shouldn't. Elijah Moore fell off. A lot of people were on for college, going through the depth ranks for fantasy or just projecting to the NFL. A few flashes here. Rookie fell. They drafted. Looks like the alpha on captain. The Jets pass. I always in general valued very tough.
So let me ask you this: staying in the same division, one of the things I do with one of my other shows, we always name an ascendant every year. This is just redraft, and we say, well, once we get to the FFPC live events in Las Vegas, who is going to be the biggest name to jump up significantly in the drafts? And I said last year's ascendant was going to be Gabe Davis, because I thought he was a little bit depressed after the way he ended the 2021 season with that Boffo performance against the Chiefs in the AFC divisional playoff. I thought he would jump up significantly. And to a point he did, but when you look at what he did in 2022, wide receiver 36 on the season, 46th highest yards per route run among wideouts. And we know that he did hurt his ankle and maybe played through that and that hurt him and what have you. And Khalil Shakir obviously stepped up and made some plays down the stretch. But for dynasty purposes, I know it's difficult because there's probably a lot of people that paid a significant amount, Chad, to get him on their rosters for the 2022 season. But you got to kind of roll with the punches here. And now I feel like whatever you paid for him in 2021, you might have to sell lower on him right now, unless you think he's in for a rebound. Chad Parsons, your thoughts on Gabe Davis in Buffalo?
Yeah, I think Gabe is one that, let's remember, he's a day 3 wide receiver. And
right,
goal construct is a day 3 wide receiver that hits. The Amon-Ra St. Browns of the world, the Stephon Diggses of the world, that they generally show, and really early, they at least show a ton of positive signs, even if they didn't hit as a that in like you said, progressed, but not enough. The expectations were sky high for him in 2022. And here's the problem is that they brought in Khalil Shakir. He showed some moments. Dawson Knox, we know that he can be a solid contributor on that chart. And the biggest part is Stephon Diggs is still there. Put all that together and you say for him to hit as a top 20 guy, top 25 guy is really a stretch. Unless Stephon, then the wide receiver is going to get used to or have to get used to a lot better coverage. They're going to see the top guy. They're going to see safeties over the top more often. Gabe Davis, I've seen some like, wow, he's benefiting from Stephon Diggs. He's benefiting from Josh Allen extending plays. It goes beyond Gabriel Davis, the player. So again, going back to all too much, I don't think he versus defenders once he has the ball. He's a product of this situation, the long ball, and the optimal. So is Buffalo? He's got to get through the gauntlet of free agency and the draft. And then I also say your guy that really hasn't come home in the early stretch of his career, 3 years now, like examples of successful players do. And what I hate to do is bet on outliers when the cost is something notable. And again, the next few, it's cheap and do whatever you want. There's still optimal ways to do it. But when you're talking about a tangible pick and an ancillary wide receiver, I think you got to be careful. Second round pick. You got to make the versus Utah more likely to hit a major way over the season. So, and Christian Kirk is higher level and passing game than this next year. So you got to be really careful with ancillary wide receivers. We are going to talk about dynasty team building, and that's one of the things. A guy like Gabe for 2-3 years sometimes, and then you got a guy that really should be best balls or master, those types of things, because he can pop off for the big game. We saw that in the playoffs. Confidence do you have putting him with just variance of usage and a lot of floor that's built there? Confident wide and mean and not spend 10 wide receivers.
I feel like I should call this a TED Talks tonight as far as Dynasty goes. But since it's Chad Parsons, it's a Chad Talks tonight because I'm learning so much on specifically landmines to avoid in Dynasty fantasy football management. I want to get into the draft aspect of it right now with you, Chad. If you are, because a lot of our viewers play fantasy football, not necessarily all of them play Dynasty fantasy football. If you could give some tips here, number one, if you are in a startup, you've decided to take the plunge into Dynasty fantasy football, what are some tips? And I'll bring this up too, and I want you to comment on this. There's an FFPC player. He hasn't done it so much the last 2 or 3 years, and maybe this because this is the saturation of Dynasty information that's out there. like at uthdynasty.com or footballguys.com. But his name was Norm Cruz, still is Norm Cruz. Cavalier King Charles, you might have played against him in some of your FFPC leagues, but what he did historically, since the FFPC launched Dynasty League, which is probably about 10 years or so ago, 8-10 years ago, what he would do was he would kind of punt on year one. He would sell a lot of his startup draft capital for first-round rookie picks in the next year and then the following year. And he would be okay at best his year one, but he won a lot of dynasty titles because of all that rookie draft capital that he acquired over the next coming couple of years. Your thoughts on doing that as far as punting on year one for dominance down the road, and then how you handle dynasty startups right now? What are you doing? What are some tips and tricks that you could give to the viewers tonight to ensure not only dynasty dominance or dynasty wins, but really maximum dynasty fantasy football fun? May have lost Chad. I'm not sure right now. Tyler, Tyler Soto, our producer, I forgot to give a shout out to you.
I think.
Do we have Chad? Okay, we got Chad. Perfect. Sorry.
Okay, so the startup draft. I think there's two different ways to do it. You mentioned, and both can be successful, I will say. First of all, the productive struggle, as the term goes, which means I'm going to care less about, because one thing I would say is year one might be the time to win. Do it and say, I'm going to build a team to win. You've maybe got something from redraft or 1 year football that are going to team. And yes, that's part of content, maybe making the playoffs. So it is a tough landscape for the first year of a dynasty. So I'm from that. I'm going to generate my chances for 2 and beyond, where that is a savvy strategy. Depend. So dynasty is big. Depend. That when you go, there's high value on future picks, and especially future first round picks, that can be difficult to go into a draft and find 2, 3, 4 owners that are going to trade you their first round picks through trading draft or trading in the startup draft for that first rounder. That can be tough to do. So if that is the environment, then you need to basically build the best team you can, because you may be able to acquire one extra future first. In this instance, it would be in 2024. And you're going to have a bunch of picks in the startup draft. So you kind of need to navigate that landscape. The other thing I would say is it depends on the format. If it's a 1 quarterback league, most in redraft are, but in dynasty, a lot more are super flex, where a second quarterback put in your roster, in your lineup. So that 2 quarterbacks can provide high fantasy value for you. And frankly, the top 10, 15 quarterbacks in the NFL are some of the most stable assets for the next 2, 3, 5 years in all of the dynasty. So if you have a 2 quarterback format, you need to do those high picks. If you trading up in a startup draft, I've seen this year and last year, it's a lot more accessible. You don't have to pay an exorbitant premium. You can move. For example, I've seen so many trades where you might be at the later first round of that startup draft. In round 1, your first pick that you're going to make in this entire league, and you can trade up to 101, 102, get yourself a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. Even Joe Burrow's going up there. That you can get and not have to pay a lot. But if you're out there at 109, 111, you're going to have zero. There's going to be gone. It's tougher to trade sometimes for specific players once you get past the startup draft in a dynasty league than it is actually in the startup draft itself, trading just the idea of the player and trading picks. So I like to say quarterback multiple, that's where you quarterbacks. If that's both in round 1, if that's Patrick Mahomes, then you go, have to get a Dak Prescott. I need to be high enough to maybe even get Justin Herbert. I want to be as strong as possible with those 2 quarterbacks because A, they score really well. B, they have a lot of insulation. C, they can build out your runway, as I like to say, for contending for the next 3 to 5 years. No other you're going to have as much confidence as saying who's going to be good in 2028. Patrick Mahomes bet than than any wide receiver currently in the NFL. It's just such a high floor and combination. So that's the big is I do future picks and for receivers. You kind of wait on that. If I were saying you want to build that runway, just to say it again, of what is going to be predictable over the first years. You want to basically just say off in terms of how much they're able to contend based on that. You get young players that have been productive files that we've talked about on this show and otherwise, and you get maybe the quarterback, and you're a couple older running backs, and maybe we'll pick for 5 rounds. And in picks, you do a few different stuff, a couple wide receivers. You really have rating if you're high in the first round. Those are tough assets to find in future. Also, really difficult, and it's NFL draft season, so you try to going to be great. Are any of them going to be great and be a bust? State. That's what you're doing every year. Dynasty, the right part of draft.
I want so good stuff there for anybody who's thinking about jumping in via startup. Now, there's some people, especially FFPC players, that go on myffpc.com. They look at the dynasty section. They see, oh, FFPC doesn't have any dynasty startups going right now. Maybe I'll check out the orphans. And you look at the orphans. We probably got a few dozen orphans up there right now. Again, some of them are reduced price, some are full price because they're really good teams. But you look at if you're looking, let's say, Chad, you get in a mood, right? You're like, you know what? I'm going to resurrect a dynasty team right now. I'm going to go to myffpc.com and I'm going to pick out an orphan and I'm going to win a title with it this year. What are any tips that you can give our viewers on how to pick the right dynasty team? I think you kind of alluded to it with youth and dynasty rookie draft picks in the first hour. I'll let you touch on that again. But other things that you look for when you're picking out the right orphan team to ride to a championship.
Yeah, that's a great one. But I will say that dynasty and it is that to be. But what I for an or FCC set, go right on there. They have the one quarterback. They also have the flex, and you got to add up the values for the key players. And you don't have to, all 20 players, all 20 assets. You don't have to do that. But what key picks they have for this year, in the top maybe 8, 10, 12 players. You put that in, and I have a chart right on the page. Team percent. So the first way is valuing value in there. For example, Joe Jefferson Pitts, and almost I said, you know what? Things hard to find. Justin Jefferson, he's hard to find. That's going to be an asset, even if last year he didn't produce the lead asset. The Oracle of the fund. Build around it. That team, like money print. One, say, look that I trade that team that was ability to walk away from. It was available deep. So that's what I would say. You can, again, just use each trade calculator I give when you sign up. Get is shows team strength. What the average team in your league would be, and you can it's 200. This one's 150, so it's an average range for the league in terms of team, but it's not far off. You put the assets, and you're like, this one impression. And I've seen plenty of orphans out there that end up being above average in terms of their overall team strength score. And I think don't assume that they are all. You just have to go through their yeoman's work and examine every team. It this way, opportunity to get players that maybe might be, if you're a startup draft, they could be difficult to acquire. So look for A, players that you would want to build around. B, look for distressed assets. We talked about Deontay Johnson a segment or two ago. If he's on a team, he didn't produce that well last year, but if he's on an orphan and you say, well, I think he's going to bounce back, that could be a potentially profitable scenario. So you kind of need to look for undervalued profiles that you like as part of the orphan roster as well. So again, I think the key is look for those building blocks, look for answers at tough to fill positions. If that's an FF, what if they have a stud tight end? That's hard to find. And so you can work around running back pretty easily. It's a shallow roster. You can get stuff off the waiver wire every single week in terms of injury away options. So I think, again, a core level wide receiver or two would be nice. A quarterback, that's okay. But I think that you can find a quarterback in a cheap trade as receivers. If tight end is there, that's an absolute. Then you would obviously, ideally, have a team in advance. But what I will say, FFP roster round pick, you might have a pretty quick clock on if you're able to. So, rounder, it would react too much and positive. Oh well, they got some third round picks. I'm not going to say they're. It's not a deeper league, so it doesn't mean as much. And I wouldn't be overreading being a bunch of third round picks if you see that and you're unfamiliar with the FFPC.
And I think that's the thing is you have to weigh it, like whether it's a private league, whether it's FFPC, whether it's another dynasty platform, you have to understand how these teams are managed year to year. And Chad, you may even know this guy. His name is Jake Rickroad at Clutch Fantasy on Twitter. You might have competed against him in some FFPC leagues, but I've interviewed him a couple of times over the past 8 or 9 years. And he is of the opinion, if you manage your dynasty team right, you will never have to worry about rebuilding. Like it's a constant refresh. It's a constant thing for him to be competitive each and every year in all the dynasty leagues that he's in. Is that realistic? If you manage your team the right way, can you always avoid rebuilding in dynasty leagues?
Absolutely. And yeah, we talk about it as retooling. This is the season where the next most meaningful game, we say this on the Dynasty show with Jordan, probably 3 or 4 times, your next most meaningful game or one the following year. You're going to compete, regardless of what your team status is, you are even with, and you will start in September. And so you need to build your team. You need to have the mindset. I am until the moment I am math. I need, and I the funds. And if you up on and the so you need to get to October and say of it. Too early is a mistake. Take and saying sometimes you'll get a trade and be like, well, I'm for that. You're like, hey, well, I'm going to look here. That's that are still in it through. So one thing I've come up with is everyone wants to get younger, and they always say, well, if I intend later as well, and it has to be through the younger list. You have to think about this mix, because I think, again, a lot of players are quote unquote older, and it really only takes cornerstone or players on the young, the building for later. One example, Mike Evans right now is super cheap. He's like round 10, round 12 of some of these startups. But if you have him blended together with, say, a mid-career Deontay Johnson, he's 27. He's not on a 1 or 2 year lens right now. And then let's say up at the top of the draft, what if you got a Jefferson or Jamar Chase? 2 quote-unquote older players, but Justin Jefferson's going to be there. So if Mike tally off after a couple of years now, find somebody else. You'll probably end up trading for someone. 2 years ago, I was doing the same, having Adam Thielen in my lineup a lot. And it's to the fact that now he might be sporadically in my lineup or a flex play or something. But for a couple of years, he was so highly discounted. You're just streaming him and using him in your. So it's nice to say, I want all young guys, but it's really tough to have active roster. They're really expensive. And then if you then it's all spec, and that's how team, because you lineup. So I think that blend of whether it's mostly young guys and you have 2 or 3 or 4 older players that are productive, that have been there, done that, you can do it that way. Or I think I have plenty of leagues that are on the older side, but when you draft well in the first or second round of your startup draft, you're kind of keeping an eye out to always maybe get a core player. Again, you can have a blend that way as well. So I think you can do it either way, whatever your preference is. But I think having that blend and not thinking extremely old, that gets you in trouble. And you can have a whole team within 24 months. You start trading away all your draft well, and then you have 30-year-olds that turn into 32. Now you're in trouble. The other side, though, is you keep drafting on have to turn into action. So drafting the wrong players, great. But if that's also trading away 107 to get an auto wide receiver, that's again, thinking in terms of week 1 this year, I am contending. And unless I get mathematically, that's when I will start thinking future and start to think about the next year. Have that week 1 mindset all off season. And then the other part is nice that are productive. They've been there, done that for the last 2, 3, 5 years, and they're mid-career, and then also have part of your younger developmental, your rookie pick into that cupboard of talent. So I think you have to have A, roster blend, and B, always think competitively going into the season, through the off season, and then at the start of the season. Slow starts happen, and it's all about contending all the way until.
We are going to think competitively for the next 27 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, here tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Bettor Sports Network. When we come back, we're going to talk about the biggest mistakes that players are making in dynasty leagues right now. We're going to talk about the combine and how to interpret these results correctly, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends specifically, with Chad Parsons. And we're also going to talk Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame, Sean Tucker, the running back from Syracuse. We're going to talk about Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what Dynasty Twitter is getting wrong. That's all if we can fit it in, and we're going to do our best to do it. He's Chad Parsons, Under the Helmet Dynasty, UTHDynasty.com, footballguys.com, at Chad Parsons NFL on Twitter. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. We got a ton more for you right after this.
Moose and Keith. Weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.
The word genius is there. Bob Glover, it describes. When's the last time that... Because I've been defeated by Twitter today.
I'll tell you how Twitter defeated me one time. I had the mistaken impression that the year that Troy Polamalu won the Defensive Player of the Year, it looked like it was going to go to Clay Matthews Jr., and I tweeted it. And there was a guy on the media bus. He was like, oh, yeah, he's got it, a guy I trust. I won't tell you who it was, but his initials are Mike Garafalo. So I went with it. Got a DM from Rich Eisen, NFL Network. He goes, you sure about that? I go, oh, man. Oh, I just got this wave. Because, like, accuracy to me is really important.
Yeah.
So I'm literally on the media bus. We're just getting back from media day. We are slipping and sliding in Dallas. It's snowing. I get off the bus. I open my laptop. I am hunched over. and I just literally people are passing me. Bob, what's wrong? And it was Palomalu, and Adam Schefter had retweeted me. Trey Wingo had retweeted me. I'm like, I'm dead.
So when it's Palomalu, then how do you handle that? Like, what was the subsequent tweet
I think
afterwards?
I said got some bad Twitter info. I didn't put Garofalo's name on there. I had
10 years later, you can out him. I like that. Yeah.
He wouldn't mind that. He knows the stories.
Yeah.
He actually said to me, "Hey, Bob, I think you might have jumped the gun on that." I was like, "Oh, crap." There we go.
Campus to Canton on the Bettor Sports Network.
Would Dion bench Shador?
I don't think he would.
Like, how bad would it have to be? Because we've seen horrendous quarterback play from this Colorado team for the last, 4 years, 5 years? JT Shroud, Brandon Lewis, just terrible quarterback play. Like, they were 131st, which is dead last in pass EPA per play. Obviously, it will be better, but how bad does it have to be for him to bench his own son? Like, I'm not sure he will ever either, like, especially with the attitude that he came in with.
If they don't get Rashada, who do they bench him for this year anyway? I don't know that there's another answer on that roster that you go to. They don't really have a guy behind him. So I don't even know if we would know the answer to that until the next year, assuming that, he doesn't declare for the draft, he returns, they bring somebody else that's competent and behind him.
If they're going to do this the Lincoln Riley way, next year would be the class to bring somebody in. Shedeur Sanders is going to be a third-year player. So he's going to play 2023. I don't think he's declaring for the 2024 NFL draft. So he's going to play in 2024 and then declare for the 2025 NFL draft. And let's remember this. He hasn't had a full recruiting cycle at Colorado. He will have that next recruiting cycle. So maybe he could get one of these class of 2024 quarterbacks that are coming to Colorado.
However you're invested in sports, from betting to fantasy, collectibles, and more, join our community on Bettor Sports Network.
Are you ready for the quickest 23 minutes in high-stakes fantasy football television? Well, if you're not, we're doing it right now. It is Eric Balkman, that's me, from the FFPC, the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the road of his high-stakes lowdown. He is Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty, UTHDynasty.com, footballguys.com, and, of course, follow him on Twitter at Chad Parsons NFL. I want to remind, Chad is an expert in dynasty leagues. He has given us so much, way more than we deserve tonight, on how to manage your dynasty teams properly. And if you want to parlay that advice into dynasty championships this year, there's no better way to do it than at myffpc.com. You can adopt the dynasty orphan team today with the FFPC at myffpc.com. Discounted teams, reduced price teams available, ranging from $77 all the way up to $2,500. So whatever your price point is, myffpc.com has a price point for you for your dynasty fantasy football team. myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com, myffpc.com. The combine is going on right now, and I think the big news that we're seeing tonight, Pittsburgh defensive tackle Kalijah, I apologize to his family if I'm butchering his name, Kalijah Cansey ran a 4.67 at the combine. He is a defensive tackle. That is one of the best times we've ever seen at the combine, which begs the question here, Chad Parsons from Football Guys and Under the Helmet. How do we, not necessarily for defensive tackles, but the numbers we see from the combine, how do we prevent ourselves from going gaga over them, overvaluing them? They're important tools in assembling your dynasty teams, but how do we avoid making the pitfalls and the mistakes that many people do of overvaluing the results we see from Indianapolis?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I would say from years ago, and we talk about developing and growing and learning over the years, that years ago, I wanted that wide receiver, that had an elite athletic profile. And I've learned, I've seasoned, I've gotten older, I've gotten more curmudgeon in terms of what I'm looking for. Generally, that's the boom bust profile. The guy that, the guy 6'4", ran 4.38, but it's like, why wasn't he more productive in college? Great question. Something. The production score in my projection model is basically a proxy for film study. Skills, releases at the line of scrimmage, they probably with a low production score, like all the guy's 95% or a guy's 50%. And so I think one of the more overrated aspects and shouldn't look for is like the guy that has the huge elite wide receiver. There's a ton, and I would say this is that pedigree trumps everything, and then production is next. So if you want a round one drafted wide receiver, and for that right now, versus day 3, excited about a guy that ran the 4. And if you want to downgrade a guy, that's one of the Jarvis Landry, for example. You know, look at Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, got very productive in college. They didn't have great workouts. I know I'm trying to pick if you want to say that, but what I mean is guys that were productive in college, if they weren't, how were they productive then? Because their peers got open, they still defenders after, despite not 4-3. So I would say on in the 4-5 usually not fighters or guys that were even overly relevant. It means they have a lot of athleticism. They might have trained really well. They might have a track background, but it doesn't mean that they can get open option route versus a legit in a. So that's one of the biggest ones. The athletic, I will say at running back, it matters, but wide receiver that I would say don't look so much at the shiny object and faster times than the other two positions I just named. But wide receiver is about production and about trying to get round one pedigree. And again, if a guy checks the box and doesn't run 4.68, then it's okay. Wide spectrum of possibilities because wide in the all.
All right, so let me ask you this: March, early March, right now, we're still about 2 months away from the draft, and obviously, people are getting their appetites wet for rookie drafts, which will be coming up with the FFPC in mid-May. But Chad, as it stands right now, for people managing dynasty leagues, what's the biggest mistake you see players making at this time of year, and how do you avoid making that mistake?
These two felt plenty to value rookies. It's look at the NFL draft of the incoming talent. However, the biggest mistake I see is the drum. What you're going to from every prospect. Here's all the positives. The player comp and highly productive player from the positivity, especially but they're slow to produce. Running backs need the lead job. How many rookies in the first 1 to 2 years are going to get even a crack to be the lead back? So these are uphill battles, and so I almost go at it with worse. Like look for reasons why they're not going to be successful, because the biggest mistake is over positivity about so is people. I have one. I'm thinking that those are building blocks. Can be from now all the way through. You make a selection for a player, trade that pick, and just start up where you have rookie pick mixed, but during the and leading up to say with this pick, and pick like Jalen Hudson or somebody like that. Pick were to get Deebo Samuel, that gets you Drake the option. That's what makes that Evans, definitely, yeah. And this is the how are they going to be tomorrow? If they have a lot of first round picks. Those are so really big focus time of I have no could that do else quarter opposed to drafting another conversation. But I think you have to be really careful at wide receiver and quarterback of saying instead of drafting a rookie, what if I go explore trades and try to get a quality and instead.
And not enough people are doing that. And I think that's, this is part of being a proactive dynasty owner. You mentioned this in the last segment. We talked about dynasty orphans or whatever. Spend an hour going through the FFPC dynasty orphans with the rubric that Chad Parsons has just laid out for you. Yes, it is an hour and it's not fun, but think about how much fun you can have if you pick the right dynasty league the rest of the year. And I think these are mistakes that Chad's pointing out, like stuff you want to avoid right now that can really help you over the course of a 365-day season, like you're looking at with Dynasty Fantasy Football. Let's go through a couple of, because I know the combine's going on right now. We got about 12 minutes or so to go through these guys. Let's go through a few of the rookies here. Right now, tight end Michael Mayer is the consensus number one tight end in this draft class, both with the NFL and it seems to be Dynasty Fantasy Football as well. Chad Parsons, are we overvaluing Michael Mayer at this point?
I think that his then role and NFL would be. He is the favorite to be the first tight end off the board. But I think meant to go on my latest. There's an argument that Dalton Kincaid is the first Michael Mayer, and I think there's some reasons for that. And I think for Dynasty, the biggest perk for Mayer is going to be that round one pedigree if he gets it. But I think as a prospect, he's not that different from, say, Pat Freiermuth, someone tight end. Fantasy-wise and receiving-wise, there's a limited ceiling there. So I think you got to know what you're getting. If you're in a two tight end league, there's value to the floor. There's value and solidity to saying, I know I'm getting a guy that, probably the lock a handful of times probably. He is an elite ceiling. Be careful in one tight end formats of there in that style that isn't overly athletic. But if he, be careful. That's becoming rookie.
Sean Tucker's, I brought this up last week when we had Pat Corain from NBC Sports Edge and Roto World and the Ship Chasing podcast. We talked about Sean Tucker, and I said he is rising right now, not only in the FFPC redraft, like Never Too Early tournament, which is going on at myffpc.com, but just for Dynasty, you look at what he's being valued at right now. Guy out of Syracuse, are we overvaluing Michael Mayer? Are we undervaluing Sean Tucker right now, Chad?
Yeah, I love Sean Tucker for a few years. I do think that Syracuse label, the fact that when we first start seeing mock draft data and NFL draft position, anyway, I thought it was a misprint. Day 3, Sean Tucker, I thought he was going to be a top 50 pick. He's a track guy. He's going to produce well at the combine with his. I got him with a 92% rushing score and a 75%. That combination is one of the top 3 or 4 guys in the class. So it's Robinson, but he's in that next everybody else bucket, of next 3 or 4 guys. If Sean Tucker helped not hurt as well. I have his early comp, and again, I just talked about how everyone projects to a star. It's the way I do comps, but he has a lot of similarities to someone like Travis Etienne, Dalvin Cook. Until we got a PD, that's an early comp, but man, Sean Tucker, going to be a value in rookie drafts. He probably ends up going in the 3rd round, which that type of profile, that type of upside from college is going to be a big time value.
Good news on Sean Tucker there, and I'll be watching for him in my rookie drafts for sure. Let's shift to the quarterback. A couple of polarizing quarterbacks. Number 1, Bryce Young. Nobody's knocking his talent, his production. If anybody's knocking anything, it's his size. I know Todd McShay from ESPN has been knocking him. Your thoughts on Bryce Young? Yes, he's uber talented. How big are you factoring his size into your dynasty rookie drafts? And we'll loop in Superflex into this as well, Chad.
Yeah, you say, well, nobody ever goes this high in the draft. Looking at comps and, Pat White, and you list off 3 or 4 other guys. And let's also go back and say no quarterback this size has been projected to be a top 3 or 4 pick. So that means Bryce Young is rare enough that if he was 6'3", 220, did not be considered 101. The Bears would have to take him, or the Bears would be trading to a team that would be taking Bryce Young. And the only reason we're having this conversation is a big Young is not his size. They come in different shapes and sizes, and the NFL is telling us, and he played at Alabama. He didn't play at Coastal Carolina or something. So let's keep this in perspective. He played at the competitive level in college to say he's learning to handle himself at 5'8". His weight, he was good enough to win the job at against elite competition. So again, I'm not going to use that. Here's my biggest question though. Fantasy wise, he's not a big runner. We are in a day and age with quarterback here. If you don't run, you basically have to be Tom Brady or Peyton. That type of capital G Young in the to make a tangible difference to his fantasy stat line. That's my biggest, not his size, not potential durability. It's going to be, I don't think he's going to run enough. Secondary where they 500 yards. Not Jalen Hurts, but that next tier down, I don't even think he's going to do that. And that's a real ceiling limiting aspect to his fantasy future. So it's not the size, it's the fact that he limits his.
I think that's something important because, while we understand the size aspect of quarterbacks, we don't necessarily care about it for fantasy football. We care about output, right? And for a guy like Bryce Young, yes, no question, he's been talented throwing the football. But if you're going to soak, especially an early superflex rookie pick, into a quarterback, you want him to be able to run the football. Bryce Young is lacking in that, and I think that we have to maybe shift our eyes to another rookie quarterback. I want to bring this up with you, Chad. I think you probably already saw this, but just in case the viewers have not tonight. Last week, Anthony Richardson, quarterback for the University of Florida Gators, was listed at 80-1 to be the first overall pick in the NFL draft, according to Caesars Sportsbook. This week, 6-1. The odds have flipped astronomically. It's insane. Okay, he's sharing Alabama with Alabama pass rusher Will Anderson and Kentucky quarterback Will Levis at 6-1 odds, according to Caesars Sportsbook, to be the first overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. So Anthony Richardson, let's shift our focus away from Superflex, because Superflex, he's obviously a huge pick, but single start quarterback leagues, Chad Parsons, with Anthony Richardson right now getting a lot of heat, a lot of love. How do you view his pro prospects once he gets to the NFL and starts scoring points for our fantasy teams?
Yeah, it's really the fact that it's a if you just start game with this type of elite profile, look Justin Fields. The team is bad. Back. So again, the way the fantasy with in I've security wise for dynasty is a different question mark, and that really leads to some uncertainty. But in terms of I want them in these hyper quarterbacks are really great for lineups. Start one quarterbacks leagues. That is where upside is all that matters. Floor, find another guy. You can trade for Kirk Cousins for pennies if Anthony Richardson doesn't work out. But that's why in start one, I love the idea of saying, the dynasty wise or rookie wise, if he's the third quarterback off the board or fourth quarterback off the board, I'm all about that value compared to the first guy because he has an elite rushing profile, including sacks. He averaged 7 yards per carry, which again includes the negative sack plays in college. If 4 or 5, that's an elite air historical number that you just don't see. The Cam Newton, the elite in college at the position. So Anthony Richardson in this class even touches him. It was Justin Fields a couple of years ago. Malik Willis didn't have the draft pedigree. Anthony Richardson, I don't know how he gets out of the top 10 by the NFL. And you said the odds are rising. I totally get it. If you're talking, we've seen guys like Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, you draft tools. The tools work. If you're rough around the edges, you develop, we can make this work. I think Anthony Richardson is over Will Levis. I can see Stroud ahead of Richardson, but I would not be surprised at all if we see Richardson, the QB1 or QB2 off the board by the time we get to late April.
Oh, God, it's going to be so exciting. So exciting for super flex drafts, even non-super flex drafts. All right, Chad, last thing I have for you tonight. I got about 30 seconds here left on the clock. You look at Dynasty Twitter. You're active on Dynasty Twitter. What's one thing, the biggest thing, that Dynasty Twitter is getting wrong right now about this rookie class?
Well, in general, I think people on Twitter have trouble talking to each other. So that would be the first thing, communication device that people struggle to have a conversation. People to have really honest disagreements, and that's what makes Dynasty fun. I will say, and fantasy fun. We have different opinions about player value, but I would say Dynasty Twitter gets wrong is every college prospect is going stand hit rates. I think they want to write off guys as they're going to retire. They're too old to produce anymore. They do all that too soon, too preemptive. And then again, it's about shiny object season. It's about that time of year where it's all about young players. But you know what? September, Cup season all again, and it's going to be hyper produced.
UTHDynasty.com, footballguys.com is where to find out Chad's work. At Chad Parsons NFL on Twitter. Chad, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it. We'll have to have you back soon. Chad Parsons, ladies and gentlemen, we're back 7-6 Central next Thursday. JJ Zachariason from the Late Round Quarterback and the Living Stream podcast. MyFFPC.com is where to go for never too early best ball tournaments and Dynasty Orphans. Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price is up next. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show only on the Bettor Sports Network. I'm Eric